Anthony noticed the humming first. It was the thin insect buzz of the fluorescent lights, the kind that always made his temples ache. Red Willow Academy's second-floor hallway was nearly empty at that hour, a long tunnel of pale green cinder block and scuffed tile lockers shut like folded arms. He'd parked 15 minutes early, thinking he'd catch Jane by surprise and maybe grab ice cream on the way home. He turned the corner and stopped. Jane was there halfway down the corridor, pinned between the wall and a woman's shadow. She stood with her back pressed to the cold paint, small hands hovering at her sides, as if she'd been told not to move them. Her backpack sagged on one shoulder, mouth gaping open. Her cheeks were streaked with the dried trails of tears, skin gone blotchy and raw. At her feet lay the wreckage of her lunch. The unicorn on her lunchbox was smeared with peanut butter. The sandwich was flattened into the tile. An apple, rolled bruised brown on one side. A juice box had exploded, sticky orange pooling in a shallow, glistening puddle. Miss Rita Granger loomed over her close enough that Jane's toes almost touched her sensible shoes. Mid-40s hair scraped so tight into a bun it pulled the skin at her temples, glasses perched on a nose that seemed permanently angled down. Her mouth was a hard, straight line. "Say it," Rita ordered. Her voice was low but sharp, slicing clean through the empty corridor. "We're not leaving until you say it properly." Jane flinched. Her eyes flickered to the side for a heartbeat, then dropped to the floor again. I am slow," she whispered. The words shook. "I must do better." Anthony's fingers tightened around the strap of the small gift bag in his hand. He hadn't meant to bring anything big, just a new set of sketch pencils she'd been begging for. They rustled as his grip closed, paper crumpling. For a second, neither of them noticed him. Then something in the air shifted. Rita's shoulders stiffened. She turned her head slow, controlled, like a predator interrupted mid-meal. "Mr. Foster," she said. Not surprised, not embarrassed, just mildly inconvenienced. "We were having a necessary conversation." He didn't answer. His eyes were doing their own sweep, trained after years of reading rooms quickly. The smashed lunch, the way Jane's shoulders curled in. Her sleeves tugged down too far as if she'd tried to hide something. "Your daughter has been manipulative." Rita continued, adjusting her stance, but not moving aside. "She resists structure. I'm afraid coddling her at home has made my job significantly more." "Step away from her," Anthony said. The words came out low, flat. Not loud, but the kind of tone that made the air itself feel heavier. Rita's brows pinched. "Mr. Foster, I understand you're emotional, but I said step away." His gaze lifted and locked with hers. The hallway hummed. Somewhere far off a chair scraped a locker shut. Here the air dropped a few degrees. She hesitated. That tiny lapse told him everything this woman didn't expect to be questioned. Not here, not by a parent. Anthony's jaw clenched. He wasn't just looking at her. His eyes had slid to Jane's wrist where her sleeve had ridden up. Red marks circled the pale skin. Distinct, 4 on one side, 1 on the other. Not a fall, not a bump. Fingers. He could feel the old part of himself waking up, the one he thought he'd buried the day he sold his last bike. Above them, a small black dome camera sat in the corner near the ceiling, its tiny red light blinking. Rita had no idea that camera had already recorded weeks of her grabbing and cornering children in this very hallway. Anthony moved forward, slow but unyielding. Rita finally stepped back half a pace, arms folding over her chest like armor. He crouched the tile cold through his jeans, the smell of bleach and spilled juice rising. "Hey, bug," he murmured. Jane's head jerked up. Her eyes were huge brown, swallowed by wide pupils. For a second, she didn't seem to recognize him, as if she were still trapped in whatever space Rita had built around her. Then it cracked. "Dad," she choked and hurled herself into his chest. Her fingers found his shirt fists knotting in the fabric. He felt each tremor travel through her small frame. He wrapped his arms around her, carefully mindful of the bruised wrist, and stood. Rita watched, arms tight, mouth pressed thin. "You're overreacting," she said. "Some children need firmer." Anthony didn't look at her. He started down the hallway, boots striking the floor in measured beats, Jane clinging like he was the only solid thing left. He passed a bulletin board with crooked spelling tests, an open classroom door where a teacher froze mid-sentence at the sight of them, eyes flicking from his face to Jane's. At the front office window, the secretary half rose. "Mr. Foster is everything. We're done for today," he said. His voice stayed calm, but it left no room for argument. He pushed through the double doors. Outside, the light hit harder than it should have, the late afternoon sun too bright on the asphalt. Cars idled in the pickup lane, engines ticking softly. Somewhere a bird screeched from the chain-link fence. He opened the truck door and set Jane gently in the passenger seat. Her hands were still shaking as he buckled her in the click of the belt, sounding louder than usual. Her sketchbook stuck out of her backpack, pages bent and crumpled, a corner torn where someone had grabbed it. He recognized one of the drawings, a garden she'd shown him last week, the colors now smeared. He shut the door, the thunk echoing. On the other side of the glass, Jane pressed her palm against the window. He pressed his hand back for a second, felt the faint warmth through the cool surface, then forced himself to step away. The parking lot smelled of exhaust and hot tar. His hands shook as he dug his phone from his pocket. Not the uncontrolled shake of fear, but the tight, contained tremor of a man holding back something bigger. He scrolled through his contacts. Past co-workers, the sitter, old numbers he hadn't looked at in 8 years. He stopped at one. The name sat there, black letters on a bright screen, like a door he'd cemented shut, and suddenly found wide open. Anthony stared at it. Jane's reflection shimmered in the windshield, her small profile turned toward him, eyes still swollen. He thought of the bruises, the way she'd said "I am slow," like she'd rehearsed it for weeks. The ignored flinches, the skipped breakfasts, the lights she begged him to leave on. He thought of Sarah's grave, of every promise he'd made to protect their girl. His thumb hovered. Then with a small, decisive movement he tapped call. The phone rose to his ear. The line rang once, twice. A voice answered, rough and familiar. "Yeah." Anthony looked back at the school, at the blank windows and the pale green corridor he could still see in his mind. His voice was steady when he spoke. "Red Willow Academy," he said. "Now, bring everyone." Anthony didn't drive far. He pulled into the empty gravel turnout across from the school, an old maintenance pull-off where weeds grew high and the earth smelled like sun-baked dust. The engine ticked quietly as it cooled. Jane sat curled in the passenger seat, small chest rising unevenly beneath her seatbelt. Her fingers were wrapped around Butter the stuffed rabbit, as if the thing had suddenly become a life raft. He kept the engine off. He needed the quiet. A breeze pushed dry leaves across the windshield, scraping faintly like paper dragged over sand. Anthony stared through the wavering reflections, Jane's hair matted from tears, her knees pulled up tight, then rested his forehead against the steering wheel, exhaling slowly. The past had a way of arriving without permission. He wasn't thinking of Rita. He wasn't even thinking of the call he'd made. The moment he'd dialed Hawk, something old and heavy had settled back into his bones. A weight he recognized. a weight he thought he'd shed. His hands were still trembling, and that shook him more than anything else. The Iron Crows weren't just old friends. They were the only people who knew the version of him he'd spent years burying. A rumble of distant engines drifted over the hills. Not close, not yet just the low growl of machines answering a call they never ignored. Jane didn't react to the sound, but he did. His chest tightened. He turned to her. "Bug," he said softly. Her eyes flickered up. The whites were red from crying, but she wasn't crying now. She looked emptied, wrapped in shock so tight she barely breathed. "Are you hurt anywhere else?" Jane shook her head, quick, mechanical. Anthony reached gently for her wrist. She let him. The bruises were worse in the natural light, the shapes too precise. He pinched the bridge of his nose, grounding himself before anger could climb too fast. "I'm not mad at you," he said. "You didn't do anything wrong." Her lip quivered. She didn't answer. He looked out the windshield again as the wind carried that faint motor hum from far away. A sound that dragged him backward through years, whether he wanted it or not. He remembered desert roads stretching under an orange horizon, remembered Sarah's laugh over the roar of engines, hair whipping behind her as she rode pillion arms tight around him. Her hands had smelled like diner, coffee, and vanilla lotion. She was the only person who'd ever quieted the restless part of him. He remembered the night she didn't come home, the police lights flashing red-blue across the living room window, the officer's apologetic tone, the phrase "hit and run" spoken like weather news, the phone he dropped, the scream he swallowed because Jane was asleep in the next room, and he remembered selling the bikes, one by one, his custom Harley first, then the ones he'd built from scraps. He stripped himself clean. No patches, no brothers on the road, no late-night rides until dawn. He turned that world off like a switch because the only road that mattered was the one leading to Jane's crib. 5 years ago, the Iron Crows had stood in his driveway silently as he packed everything away. No judgment, just nods. A hand clapped his shoulder. A few rough, "We got you if you need us." He never called, not once, until 15 minutes ago. Anthony leaned back in his seat, staring at the dashboard, lit only by the dim glow of the parking lot street lamp. The same lamp flickered twice, buzzing lightly. Jane's breath hitched in the quiet. "You said she's been saying things to you," he said carefully. Before today, Jane shrank a little deeper into her hoodie. She didn't nod, didn't shake her head, but he saw something in the slight stiffening of her shoulders, an admission too heavy for words. His stomach twisted. He'd missed it. Weeks of her skipping breakfast, the quiet rides to school, the trembling hands when he tied her shoes, her sudden need to sleep with the hallway light blazing like a warning beacon. He'd told himself kids had phases. He'd told himself grief worked in strange ways. He'd told himself all the wrong thing. A gust of wind blew grit across the glass. Jane's small voice finally broke the silence. "Are we going back?" she whispered, eyes still down. "Not today," he said. "And not until I say it's safe." But her voice cracked. "She'll be mad." Anthony felt the temperature in his chest change like metal cooling too fast. "No," he said. "She doesn't get to be mad. Not anymore." A cloud drifted over the sun and the parking lot dimmed. Across the road, the school stood quiet, rows of windows blank, as if nothing inside them had ever gone wrong. But he knew better now. And he wasn't the only one. His phone buzzed. He checked it. Anthony stared at the message for a long moment. The gravel crunched faintly as he stepped out of the truck, letting the wind clear his head. When he looked back at Jane through the window, she watched him with a fragile, searching expression, one he recognized too well. Fear mixed with hope. "Bug," he said, opening the door again and crouching to meet her eyes. "You did everything right. You told me what happened. You hung on." His voice softened. "I should have seen it sooner, but I see it now, and I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Her fingers tightened around Butter. From far off, the low thunder of engines rolled in again, stronger this time, closer, like a storm, cresting just over the ridge. Jane looked toward the sound wide-eyed. Not frightened, not exactly, more like a child hearing something she half recognized from a distant memory. Anthony stood closing the door gently. The wind shifted, and from beyond the hill 20 engines roared as one. The engines hit the campus before the bikes appeared. A rolling tremor swept across the asphalt, vibrating through the gravel turnout, as if the ground itself were bracing. The windows of Anthony's truck rattled in their frames. Jane's eyes flew to the side window where sunlight quivered against the glass. He closed the truck door gently, but even that soft thud was swallowed under the rising thunder. The Iron Crows were close. A moment later, 20 motorcycles crested the slight hill like a steel tide on the move. Chrome flashed. Black paint gleamed. Their formation was tight, 2 columns that moved like a single breathing thing. The roar of their engines rolled through the parking lot, hard enough to set the flagpole rattling. Cars in the pickup line shuddered. Parents stiffened, unsure whether to grab their children or freeze. A teacher on yard duty dropped her clipboard. Papers fanned across the concrete. Anthony stepped out into the open, the sun hitting his face as the bikes flooded down the drive. Jane remained in the truck hands, hovering over Butter, wide-eyed but not crying. The crows slowed, and then they stopped. Kickstands slammed down one after another, sharp metallic cracks that echoed against the brick walls of Red Willow Academy. The sound was final, like a courtroom gavel. Hawk was the first to dismount. Barely a nod passed between him and Anthony, no words necessary. The other crows followed his lead, setting up a silent wall of leather and steel between the school doors and the rest of the lot. Parents were the first to react. A few clutched their children closer. Others stared, torn between fear and curiosity. The bikers weren't shouting, weren't moving aggressively, they just stood there, arms crossed, boots planted, eyes fixed on the school's entrance. The message was silent but unmistakable. No one was touching any child today. Anthony moved to the truck and opened the passenger door. Jane slid out, still clutching Butter, her small body angled instinctively toward him. He lifted her into his arms, her legs wrapping around him like she needed to anchor herself. A mother near the minivans stared at them with furrowed brows, concern blooming into something else entirely as she noticed Jane's red eyes, her clinging posture, the bruise peeking from beneath her sleeve. That mother's son Marcus stood at her side. Thin, quiet eyes, too old for his age. The mother crouched. "Baby, has your teacher ever been mean to you, really mean?" For a moment Marcus didn't breathe. Then his chin trembled. Tears filled his eyes, and he nodded. The mother's expression cracked sorrow first, then fury. A hot, devastated fury that tightened her jaw and straightened her spine. She stood abruptly and shouted across the parking lot. "Has anyone else's kid been hurt by that woman?" The question cut through the engine haze like a thrown blade. A father nearby stiffened. Another looked at his daughter Emma, standing beside him with hands tucked into her sleeves. The girl immediately lowered her gaze, shaking. Emma's father knelt, voice barely audible. Did she do something to you?" The girl tried not to cry. She locked me in the reading room," Emma whispered. "She said nobody wants noisy girls." The father's face went ashen. A grandmother clutching a backpack stepped forward. "She starved my grandson for a week, said he couldn't have lunch till he wrote perfect letters," a cluster of parents overheard. Murmurs swelled into gasps. Someone cursed. Someone else demanded to know how long this had been happening. Behind the glass doors, teachers peered out startled. One disappeared into the hallway, face pale. Anthony adjusted Jane's weight in his arms. The bruises were visible now, sunlight catching each mark like an accusation. Hawk's eyes narrowed at the sight. That was all it took. Parents swarmed toward Anthony not to confront him, but because he was the one holding the child who had finally exposed the truth. They saw the bruises, the crushed lunch remnants still on her sweater, the fear etched into her posture. Their expressions hardened. A father in a suit slammed his car door shut. "That's enough," he growled. "We're calling the police." "They're already coming," another parent said, holding up her ringing phone. The bikers stepped aside only enough to let parents gather around Anthony, not blocking, not intimidating, just anchoring the space. Then a new sound ripped across the parking lot. The front doors burst open. Principal Dawson rushed out, voice, raised hands, flapping in panic. "Everyone calm down, this isn't appropriate. If you have concerns, we can schedule private meetings." "No," a mother snapped. "We did that already. We filed complaints," another shouted. "You ignored us," a third said, voice shaking with hurt and rage. Dawson stuttered, sweat shining under his collar. "Listen. We must approach this through the proper channels." A biker behind Anthony let out a low, unmistakable laugh. "Proper channels." A phrase worn thin by every person who had tried to be quiet, patient, polite, and had been dismissed. The parents surged forward, not violently, but with purpose. They crowded Dawson, forcing him back toward the doors, as their voices rose, no longer whispers but declarations. "My daughter won't sleep without the lights on. My son threw away his drawings because she told him he was messy. My granddaughter begged not to come to school. I thought she was exaggerating. The truth wasn't trickling out anymore. It was flooding." Anthony felt Jane bury her face against his collar. He kissed her hairline, steadying her. Behind him, the engines of the Iron Crows idled deep, powerful, unbroken. A soundtrack to a reckoning long overdue. One of the officers finally arrived, cruiser lights washing the red brick in pulses. The crowd parted only enough to let him through. But for the first time, the police weren't being asked to calm a mob. They were being asked to listen to it. One mother stepped forward, trembling but resolute. "Officer," she said, "my daughter has been abused." "All these children have." The officer scanned the bruises, the bikers, the cluster of parents, the principal sweating through his shirt. His jaw tightened. Then he turned toward Anthony. "What did you see today, sir?" Anthony met his gaze, voice even. "Everything I needed to." And behind him 20 motorcycles growled in agreement. The investigation began inside the school's administrative wing, where the air smelled of burnt coffee and overworked air conditioning. The blinds were half drawn, slicing the hallway into stripes of light and shadow. The hum of the building felt nervous, like the walls themselves were waiting to see what would surface. Principal Dawson walked ahead of the group with stiff shoulders, his key ring jingling with every frantic step. His face shone with sweat, too warm, too pale. He unlocked the door to the security office with trembling fingers. Detective Maria Chun stepped inside first. She carried herself with a calm that didn't waver. dark blazer hair tied back expression, sharpened by 12 years of dealing with cases most people couldn't bear to read in the news. She scanned the room before touching anything. The security office was small, windowless, and claustrophobic. An old storage room gutted and repurposed, its walls lined with humming servers stacked on metal shelving. The atmosphere was a tight blend of warm electronics and dust. A wall of monitors flickered quietly, each square displaying a hallway, corridor, stairwell, landing, or entry point. Anthony waited in the doorway with Jane resting against his shoulder. Hawk stood behind him, filling the frame like a second doorway. Detective Chun clicked to the playback console. "Show me yesterday's hallway feeds," she said to Dawson. He hesitated. That was a mistake. The bikers behind Anthony didn't move, but the stillness was enough to make Dawson's breath hitch. His fingers scrambled over the keyboard. Chun didn't look away. Within seconds, the monitors blinked, then displayed a timeline of video thumbnails. She scrubbed back 3 days, then hit play. 113207 Hallway 2B. The grainy footage showed exactly what Anthony had pointed to earlier. A pale green corridor, silent and empty. Until a shadow entered. Rita Granger appeared from the right side of the frame, hand locked around a small boy's arm. She pushed him against the wall with mechanical precision. Her mouth moved sharp and quick. The boy flinched, his posture folding inward the way prey did when cornered. Chun paused the footage. "Zoom," she ordered. Dawson fumbled with the controls. The image enlarged. Even pixelated, the grip on the child's arm was unmistakable. Chun made a low sound in her throat, not shock but recognition. She resumed play. 124719 Hallway 3 amperes. A girl this time. Shoulders shaking. Rita's shadow swallowing hers. 140955 Hallway 2B. Another child. Another brutal grip. Another look of practiced cruelty. The pattern built itself, frame by frame, timestamp by timestamp. Behind Chun, Anthony felt Jane's fingers curl into his collar. She watched, none of it face tucked under his chin, but her breath trembled every time Rita appeared on a monitor. Chun reached for the small printer beside the monitors. "Print each incident," she said. "Full resolution, timestamps included." The machine whirred to life, spitting out black and white thermal prints one at a time. Each page bore the same elements: the hallway, a child, Rita's hand, a time, a date, a story told in silent squares. She clipped each print to the magnetic board mounted on the wall, forming a vertical line of evidence that grew and grew like bruises collecting on the school's conscience. When the last clip printed, Chun turned to Dawson. "You got explanations for these?" Dawson rubbed his palms on his slacks. "Miss Granger is strict. Some parents don't like her style, but she keeps discipline." We've never had. Chun cut him off with a sharp glance. "I didn't ask for a speech. I asked for an explanation." Her tone had weight. Dawson swallowed hard. Then Chun noticed something. A drawer in the corner half closed. Papers jutting out with bright yellow tabs. She walked over quietly. Too quietly for Dawson's comfort. She pulled the drawer open. Inside were incident reports. Dozens. She sifted through them with one hand, eyes narrowing. Most were mundane tardies, playground scuffles. Then she found one clipped with a blue paper clip. She lifted it slowly. "Report of physical and verbal misconduct," she read aloud. "Filed 10 months ago. Her eyes flicked to Dawson, by a teacher, not a parent. She held the form up where everyone could see. The signature at the bottom read Susan Ramirez. The notes were concise but devastating, observed Miss Granger gripping student's arm hard enough to leave marks. Student appeared frightened. Requested administrative review. At the bottom, in blue pen, someone had written Handled P. Dawson. Chun stared at the word handled, like it was a crack in a dam. Handled how she asked. Dawson's mouth opened and closed. He reached for the desk, fingers brushing nothing with no conviction. There wasn't enough context, he stammered. Rita's a veteran teacher. Ramirez's was overly sensitive. Chun stepped closer. Where's Miss Ramirez now? She left last semester, Dawson said. Said she was disillusioned. Chun let out a slow breath, then turned to the printer again. Print the Ramirez report. Add it to the board. The printer spat out another sheet. She clipped it beneath the last time-stamped photo. The board now displayed a chilling timeline. Ignored warning, multiple abused children, day of eruption. Chun turned back to Anthony. I'm sealing this footage, she said. All of it. She pulled out a tamper-proof evidence envelope, peeling the strip with the crisp rip of adhesive. One by one she slid the printed photos inside. Then the USB containing the raw video files. Then the Ramirez report. She pressed the seal down, stamped the date, signed the bottom, chain of custody airtight. She faced Dawson. You're required to surrender all remaining footage within the hour, she said. If anything goes missing, it won't be Rita facing charges alone. Dawson's face drained. Chun turned to Anthony. You gave the right answer out there, she said quietly. You didn't just see enough, you saw everything. Through the open door behind them, the sound of parents' voices surged again, no longer shaking but rising, bold and united. The truth had a body now. It had dates. It had frames. It had bruises. It had names. And for the first time, it had weight the system couldn't ignore. Rain arrived before the news crews did. A thin, cold drizzle fell across the courthouse steps as parents stood clustered beneath the overhang, clutching jackets, coffee cups, and each other. The building loomed with gray stone and steel frames, its columns slick with water. Reporters hovered at the bottom of the staircase like birds, waiting for scraps, cameras wrapped in plastic lights, shrouded microphones angled upward. Anthony kept Jane close beneath his arm, her small hood pulled low. Hawk and two crows flanked them, silent, immovable. The engines were parked across the street in a neat double-line chrome, wet and glistening like armor waiting to be claimed. Then the courthouse doors opened. Rita Granger emerged in cuffs. Her expression remained infuriatingly unchanged, tight-lipped, detached, as if she were still the most inconvenienced person in the room. Two officers guided her down the steps, umbrella shielding only her. Reporters surged forward. Then he appeared behind them, the real threat. David Brennan. A man in an immaculate charcoal suit, hair slicked back, expression calm as a surgeon preparing to cut. He didn't rush. He didn't even look at Rita. Instead, he descended the steps with the practiced ease of someone who loved the theater of public sympathy. His voice cut through the rain like a blade. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. We want to address this dangerous misunderstanding. Cameras snapped. Lights flicked on. Anthony felt Jane grip his sleeve. Brennan continued. Miss Granger is a respected educator with over 23 years of unblemished service. Discipline is not abuse. Structure is not cruelty. And we will demonstrate that what happened at Red Willow Academy was nothing more than proper classroom management blown wildly out of proportion. A ripple of outrage passed through the parents, but Brennan lifted a hand, silencing them without even looking. Unfortunately, he said, eyes flicking toward the bikers, a group of individuals associated with an outlaw motorcycle gang, attempted to intimidate the school and pressure witnesses. We believe this created a climate of fear and misinformation. Hawk scoffed under his breath. The sound carried like distant thunder. Brennan smiled, slow, poisonous. Children are impressionable. They repeat what they're told. It is tragic but common for parents to project their own anxieties onto their kids. We suspect some accusations may have been coached. Anthony's jaw tightened. Brennan wasn't aiming at Rita's innocence. He was aiming at the parents' credibility. He spread his hands as if in sympathy. We ask the community to allow this case to proceed without mob interference. Miss Granger looks forward to clearing her name. The officers escorted Rita to a waiting car. The door slammed. Cameras exploded with flashes. Anthony turned away, anger coiled so tightly in his chest he could barely breathe. Jane buried her face against the seam of his jacket. Then Anthony's phone buzzed. Unknown number. You're hurting your daughter by dragging her through this. Stop before it gets worse. A second message followed almost instantly. Kids lie. Courts don't take bikers seriously. He swallowed hard. Another parent gasped nearby. Her phone glowed with a similar message. Another father cursed, shaking his head, reading something threatening enough to pale his cheeks. Anonymous pressure. Coordinated intimidation. Brennan's fingerprints were all over it. But the lawyer wasn't done. He stepped under the overhang, as the rain thickened, looking directly at the cluster of parents. I'd like to make one thing absolutely clear, he said smoothly. My client has been targeted by individuals with a history of violent associations. We will be presenting this to the court. He paused, timing perfect. And we will request a psychological evaluation for the children involved. Many of them exhibit signs of emotional instability, common in families dealing with stress, or Anthony moved before he realized it. He didn't step forward to start a fight. He simply shifted his weight, Jane in his arms, chin tilting upward enough to make Brennan meet his eyes. Something in Anthony's stare halted the speech mid-sentence. For a moment the courthouse fell silent except for the soft hiss of rain. Then Brennan delivered the final blow. We will be requesting that the court examine whether these allegations are the result of coaching or emotional manipulation by certain parents. A mother choked in outrage. Another burst into furious tears. Hawk stepped forward, voice low, dangerous. You just made a mistake, counselor. Brennan only smiled again, shark-like, unbothered. We shall see. He turned and walked away, surrounded by reporters who eagerly followed microphones stretching toward him like claws. Anthony stood rooted, rain sliding down his sleeves. He wasn't a man easily intimidated. He wasn't afraid of threats, bikers, lawyers, or the system. But this was different. This wasn't a hallway confrontation or a fistfight. This was a war of narratives. A war fought with headlines, sound bites, and public opinion, where truth didn't matter unless people believed it. Anthony looked at the courthouse doors. Inside were the videos, the photos, the reports, the sealed evidence. But outside here was the battlefield Brennan had chosen. Not the law, the crowd, the rumor mill, the court of public perception. Anthony realized something heavy and cold. Brennan wasn't trying to win by proving Rita innocent. He was trying to win by making parents too scared, too ashamed, or too exhausted to keep fighting. He looked down at Jane. Her small hand squeezed his jacket with the trust of someone who didn't understand any of this, but believed wholly that her father would find a way through. He brushed her hair back gently. No muscle he had could take down Brennan. No biker wall could silence the smear campaign. No fist could break a whisper campaign. This fight wasn't about strength. It was about endurance. He turned to Hawk. "We're not done," Anthony said quietly. Hawk nodded. Not by a long shot. Rain pooled around their boots. Parents gathered closer. Phones buzzed with fresh, anonymous messages, proof that someone was already trying to scare them back into silence. Anthony lifted his chin, breath steady. They could fight lies. They could outlast pressure. But for the first time, he understood something brutally clear. He couldn't win this battle with leather and engines. He had to win it with truth loud enough to drown out a lawyer who made a career twisting it. And Brennan had just declared war. The rain didn't let up. It sheeted across the courthouse, awning in relentless silver streaks, as parents slowly trickled toward the parking lot, shaken, angry, and no longer sure what the next hour, let alone the next day, would require of them. Brennan had cracked something open in the community, and it wasn't sympathy. It was fear. Anthony lifted Jane into the truck, tucking her gently into the back seat beneath a blanket. She was exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that lived behind the eyes born from too many adults saying too many heavy words too close to her small world. Her hand clung to butter even in sleep. Hawk stepped to Anthony's side. "Get her home," he said quietly. Rain drummed on his leather. "We got the rest." "The rest?" Anthony asked. Hawk didn't answer at first. Instead, he jerked his chin toward the line of motorcycles idling across the street. They were no longer just lined up. They were forming a perimeter. Two bikers escorted a mother and her son to their car, walking slow, eyes alert. Another pair walked shoulder to shoulder beside a father who kept checking his phone with trembling fingers. A third group blocked a roaming cameraman who tried to film a crying grandmother. One biker stepped in front of the lens, silent, immovable, boots planted like a wall. The Iron Crows weren't posturing. They were insulating. From the rain, from the cameras, from Brennan's narrative. They shielded families the way they'd shielded each other on the road, without being asked, and without expecting thanks. A minivan door slammed. One mother looked at Hawk, not with fear but with immense relief. "Thank you," she whispered. Hawk nodded once. Nothing more. Anthony watched all this unfold around him, the rain blurring the edges of his vision, turning chrome into streaks of liquid silver. He felt an ache rise in his chest, one that had nothing to do with anger. This wasn't the brotherhood he'd walked away from. It was the one he'd kept. He turned to Hawk. "You didn't have to bring all these guys." Hawk's expression softened in a way Anthony wasn't used to seeing. "You were one of ours long before today," Hawk said. "And those kids," his voice tightened, roughened, "they're all ours now too." Anthony didn't expect the emotion that hit him next. It was heavy and warm, the kind that sat behind the ribs and refused to move. But Hawk wasn't finished. There was a shadow behind his eyes that hadn't been there earlier. "My daughter Hawk," began slowly, "was in Rita's class. Years back." Anthony stilled. "She never told me until she was older," Hawk said. "Didn't want to upset me. Didn't think I'd believe her over a teacher." Rain slid down his beard, but his eyes didn't waver. "I should have pushed harder. Should have seen it. Should have said something." A muscle flickered in his jaw. "I can't change what I missed," Hawk said. but I can damn well stand here now for the ones who still have a chance." Anthony swallowed. The two men stood under the shelter of the truck's open door, the rain roaring around them, yet the moment felt carved out, quiet, intimate, like a confession, whispered into a confessional booth built from chrome and storm clouds. Jane stirred in the back seat, murmuring softly. Anthony glanced back, smoothing her hair, then turned to Hawk. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me," Hawk replied. "We're not finished." He jerked his thumb again, this time toward the sidewalk where three more crows approached, arms full of grocery boxes. "What's that for?" Anthony asked. Hawk shrugged as if it were obvious. "Parents'll need meals. Some have court dates coming. Some need babysitting. Some gotta work. We fill in the gaps." A biker with a skull tattoo on his neck chimed in as he passed. "Also started a therapy fund. Kids shouldn't wait months for appointments." Anthony blinked. "You started a fund?" Hawk snorted. "What'd you expect? We play cards for fun and violence. We also know how to raise money." A father approached, then Marcus's dad. His eyes were rimmed red, but something else had replaced the earlier fear. Resolve. He looked at Anthony. "One of your guys walked me to my car." His voice cracked. "No one's done that for me in years." Anthony didn't know what to say. The father continued, voice gaining strength. "I'll be at the next hearing. Marcus is talking to a counselor now. One of your men gave me the number." Behind him, a biker lifted a hand. "Always got room for one more on the good side." The father managed a trembling laugh. More parents approached. Mothers, fathers, grandparents. Some crying, some furious, all bolstered by the line of bikers who refused to let them feel alone. The smear campaign had tried to splinter them. The brotherhood welded them together instead. A sudden buzz vibrated in Anthony's pocket, a new message. He expected another threat. "Therapy's covered for Jane. Every session, every bill. Your job is to get her there." He stared at the screen. Rain blurred the letters until he blinked it clear. Another message followed. "We've got the fight outside. You focus on the fight inside." Anthony closed his eyes for a moment, overwhelmed in a way he didn't know how to name. Not gratitude, not relief, something deeper. Community. He looked up at the line of bikers, patches, soaked boots, muddy rain dripping off helmets, and saw not soldiers or rebels or renegades. He saw guardians. For the first time since this nightmare began, he didn't feel like he was carrying Jane's world alone. He exhaled and nodded once. "All right," he said. "Let's fight this." Hawk clapped his shoulder firm and steady. "We already are." And for the first time since the hallway, Anthony believed him. Morning light softened everything. It spilled across Anthony's kitchen table in wide, warm bands, catching the edges of cereal bowls, highlighting the tiny, frayed threads on Jane's sweater sleeve, warming the air with the faint smell of toast and acrylic paint. After days of courts, rain engines, and noise, the quiet felt like a small miracle. Jane sat at the table with a cup of cocoa, both hands wrapped around it, watching the steam curl upward like it was something alive. Her sketchbook lay open in front of her, today's page, filled with something new, a field of tall flowers. Not bruised colors, bright ones, pinks and yellows stretching toward a sky she'd painted too blue for realism but perfect for hope. Anthony placed a stack of documents beside her, the paper whispering across the wood. Red Willow withdrawal forms, medical records, enrollment files for Meadowbrook Elementary, all neatly clipped, the top sheet crisp and waiting for his signature. He didn't touch them yet. "Hungry?" he asked. Jane shrugged. "A little." It wasn't much, but it was a universe better than the hollow. "I'm fine," she had repeated for weeks. He buttered toast, poured more milk into her mug, sat across from her while the heater hummed along the wall. The house felt almost like it used to before dread lived in the corners. "Do you like Meadowbrook so far?" he asked gently. Jane drew a slow line across the page. "Mrs. Park talks soft," she murmured. "Not mean soft. Just soft." Anthony nodded. "That's good. And Sophie sits by me at art time," she added. "She likes bunnies." Anthony smiled despite the tightness in his chest. "That's good too." Jane didn't look up. "She doesn't grab." Everything inside Anthony twisted. He reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. Careful, gentle grounding. "I need you to know something," he said quietly. "What happened at your old school, that wasn't your fault. Not one part of it." Her breathing stuttered. He let silence sit for a moment, soft and warm like the light. He'd learned that some of the most important things needed space. When she looked up, her eyes were wet, but steady. Do I have to see her again?" Anthony exhaled slowly. He'd been expecting this question, dreading it, preparing for it. "Yes," he said honestly, "at the courthouse. But you won't be alone. I'll be right there." Jane's small fingers tightened around her pencil. "Does she get to talk to me?" "No," he said immediately. "She never gets to talk to you again." Jane swallowed. Her gaze dropped to the sketchbook. Her pencil moved again, this time drawing a tiny figure between the flowers. A girl, alone but standing tall. Anthony gathered the forms, smoothing the edges, making room for the one thing he'd been avoiding, the trial notification letter, lying folded and too white on the counter. He opened it. Children's testimony. Day 2. Guardian presence allowed. He closed it and slid it beneath the pile. "Bug," he said softly, "there's something I need to ask you. And you can say no. You always get to say no to this." She looked up. "Would you feel okay answering some questions in court?" Anthony asked. "Just telling the truth about what happened." Her eyes widened, not afraid but uncertain, like someone peering over the edge of a diving board and calculating the distance below. He leaned forward. "You don't have to be brave alone," he said. "You just have to be honest. That's all anyone will ask from you." She stared at him for a long moment, her thumb brushing the edge of her sketchbook, her breathing tiny but controlled. Then she slid off her chair. She walked around the table, and she stood in front of him. Anthony froze as she reached up, tiny fingers gripping the collar of his leather vest, hanging on the back of his chair. The same vest she had held onto at the courthouse days earlier. She placed her palm against the worn patch. "I'll tell the truth," she whispered. His vision blurred for a second. He blinked quickly, swallowing the ache in his throat. "You sure?" he asked, voice low. She nodded. "You'll be there." "Every second," he said. "I won't move." She pressed her forehead against his chest and stayed there. The morning light wrapped around them, both warm and steady. When she finally sat back down, she opened her sketchbook to a new page. This time she drew 2 figures, a girl and a man behind her, jaw set, shoulders broad, standing like a wall between her and something unseen. Anthony packed the Meadowbrook paperwork into a folder, the soft click of the clasp sounding like a step forward. Jane pushed her drawing across the table. "This one's for court," she said. He ran his thumb across the paper. Not to fix it, just to feel it. The quiet wasn't heavy anymore. It was preparation, and tomorrow they'd walk into a courtroom together, not as victims, not as shadows, but as a father and daughter who had already survived the worst. Now they were ready to speak it aloud. The courtroom felt colder than it looked, not because of the air conditioning, but because of the silence, the sharp, electric kind that gathers right before a sky splits open with lightning. Wooden benches gleamed under fluorescent lights. Papers rustled, shoes scuffed, but no one spoke above a whisper. Anthony held Jane's hand as they stepped inside. She wore her blue sweater and clutched her sketchbook to her chest like it was armor. He guided her to their seat in the second row, positioned close enough for her to see everything far enough that she didn't feel trapped. The Iron Crows filled the back wall in a single unmoving line. Boots, planted arms crossed their presence, a silent barricade of leather and resolve. Even the bailiff gave them a second glance. Rita Granger sat at the defense table, hair pulled into the same severe bun suit, pressed flat expression unreadable. The only sign of tension was the way she pinched the side of her thumb, small, controlled, obsessive. Brennan stood beside her, smoothing his tie with predatory confidence. Judge Harmon entered. The gavel struck once, a clean, decisive crack like bone against marble. Court is now in session. The attorney for the state, Jennifer Martinez, stepped forward. Your Honor, the prosecution calls Detective Maria Chun. Chun took the stand. Calm. Precise. Her presence carried the same weight as sealed evidence. Martinez began. Detective, please describe what you recovered from Red Willow Academy. Chun nodded once. 17 time-stamped video clips from hallway security cameras. 3 months of archived data. A written misconduct report filed by a faculty member. Medical documentation from multiple pediatricians. She gestured to the table where the tamper-proof evidence envelope sat still. Sealed chain of custody signatures, crisp, all authenticated. Brennan rose instantly. Objection, Your Honor. We question the validity of these materials. Chain of custody. Harmon raised a hand. You may question it during cross. Sit down. Brennan sat tight-lipped. Martinez continued. Detective, did you personally seal these items? Yes. And is this your signature? Chun nodded at the envelope on display. Yes. Your Honor, the state moves to enter Exhibit B into evidence. The judge inspected the seal, then nodded. Accepted. Martinez approached the monitor. Detective Chun, please cue clip 1. The lights dimmed. A grainy black and white image filled the screen. The hallway. The pale green wall. A child, small and rigid. Rita entering the frame like a shadow with weight. Then the grabbing. The jerk. The cornering of a child whose eyes were already deadened by fear. Gasps rippled across the courtroom. Jane squeezed Anthony's hand so tightly he nearly flinched, her breath hitched not from surprise but recognition. Martinez didn't give the room time to breathe before cueing the next clip. Clip 2, Clip 3, Clip 4. Each stamped with dates, each bearing Rita's hand on another child's arm, each a cold dissection of cruelty. Chun narrated only when necessary. Here, same pattern, same blind spot, she believed. Cameras couldn't see. Brennan stood face taut. Your Honor, these lack context. We cannot hear audio. Martinez cut in smoothly. We don't need audio to see pain. Harmon nodded for her to continue. The footage ended. The lights rose. The courtroom felt different now, like the walls had leaned in listening. Martinez turned to the jury. We would next like to submit corroborating evidence from one of the youngest victims. Jane stiffened. This was her moment. Her choice. Anthony, she whispered, barely audible. Is it time? Yes, Bug, he whispered back. But I'm right here. She nodded once, so small, so brave, and rose from her seat. The sketchbook trembled in her hands. She approached the stand. Martinez spoke softly, kneeling. Jane, sweetheart, you can stay seated if you'd like. Jane shook her head. She wanted to stand. Martinez handed her a tissue. Then, did Miss Granger ever hurt you? Jane's voice was soft but carried through every corner of the courtroom. Yes. How Jane lifted her sleeve. Gasps again. The bruise outlines weren't fresh anymore, but the marks were still visible, fading but undeniably shaped like fingers. And is there something you brought with you today? Martinez asked gently. Jane nodded, opening her sketchbook. She turned it to a page, the page she'd drawn the morning she decided to testify. The field of flowers. The little girl, and behind her the tall man standing like a wall, between her and the danger in the blank space beyond the page. A portrait of safety. Jane. Martinez whispered, "Why did you draw this one?" Jane looked at Anthony. "Because he protects me," she said. "He always protects me." Her small voice cracked. "And she can't tell me lies anymore." Martinez swallowed visibly, and even Judge Harmon's face softened. Brennan stood adjusting his glasses, attempting to compose himself. He approached carefully. "Jane," he said, voice artificially gentle, "is it possible your father told you what to say?" The courtroom froze. Jane blinked at him once, twice. "No," she said plainly. "My dad doesn't tell me what to think. Miss Granger did." A mother in the back sobbed into her sleeve. Brennan tried again. "Do you remember everything correctly?" "Sometimes children get confused when I remember the wall," Jane whispered. "I remember the color. I remember the smell of her coffee. I remember the crack shaped like a cloud. I remember she told me I'm slow." Every detail was too concrete to deny. Brennan slowly sank back into his seat. There was nothing left to say. Judge Harmon straightened. "Thank you, Jane," she said gently. "You may return to your father." Jane walked back to Anthony Head, high hands trembling, and he lifted her into his lap, pressing a soft kiss to the top of her head. Martinez stepped forward for the final blow. "Your Honor, the state rests." Brennan didn't rise. He didn't need to. The evidence had already spoken for him and against him. Judge Harmon raised the gavel. "Given the overwhelming proof," she said, "this court finds." The sound was decisive, clean, final, guilty. The gavel's final crack still echoed when the room exhaled. Not loudly, not triumphantly. More like a deep collective release, the kind a community gives when something poisonous has finally been named for what it is. Rita Granger didn't move. Her hands tightened around the edge of the defense table, knuckles bleaching. For the first time since all this began, her mask slipped. A flicker, brief but unmistakable, passed across her eyes. Fear. Brennan leaned toward her, whispering furiously, but the courtroom had changed. His voice no longer carried weight. The jurors avoided his gaze. The parents stared openly, not intimidated anymore. Even Dawson, sitting pale in the gallery, looked smaller, as though he wished he could fold into the bench. Judge Harmon straightened her stack of papers. "We will proceed with sentencing," she announced. "Given the severity and duration of the misconduct, the betrayal of professional duty, and the harm inflicted on multiple minors, this court sentences Rita Granger to 8 years in state custody with no possibility of parole before 5. Furthermore, she is permanently barred from any employment involving children. Another crack of the gavel. Final. A bailiff stepped forward. "Ma'am, stand." Rita obeyed stiffly. Her cuffs clicked shut with a metallic snap, small, almost delicate, but it landed like thunder in the ears of every parent in the room. Jane flinched only once. Anthony's hand covered hers instantly. The bailiff led Rita away. Her shoes clicked across the tile. No one spoke. No one reached out. No one pitied her. She disappeared through the side door, swallowed by the system she had counted on to protect her. The courtroom felt warmer without her. Anthony exhaled slowly, chest loosening for the first time in weeks. Jane looked up at him, searching. "Is it over?" she whispered. He bent close, brushing a fingertip across her cheek. "It is for her," he said. Then, softer, "We won." Her shoulders dropped. She didn't smile, not yet, but something unknotted in her posture. Martinez approached, offering Jane a quiet nod. "You were very brave," she said. "Your testimony mattered." Jane pressed closer into Anthony's side. "Okay," she whispered, as if filing the words away. In the back row, Hawk met Anthony's gaze. No grin, no boasting. Just a solemn nod that said everything. "We held the line. Now you take her home." Parents began rising, some wiping tears, some embracing, some simply breathing in relief. They moved like people stepping out of a storm shelter and finding the sky finally clear. Anthony lifted Jane into his arms. Her small hands clutched his vest, fingers curling around the worn patch at the shoulder. As he carried her toward the aisle, Brennan stood abruptly. "Mr. Foster." Anthony paused, not because he wanted to, but because Jane felt him do it. Brennan's expression was cold, pride cracked, but not destroyed. "This isn't the end," he warned. "Civil suits, appeals, public perception." Anthony didn't let him finish. He shifted Jane higher on his hip, letting her rest her head beneath his chin, and answered with a calm that Brennan wasn't prepared for. "It's over for her," he said. "And that's what matters." Brennan froze. It was the verbal equivalent of turning off an engine mid-Reverend Anthony walked away without giving the man another glance. Outside the courtroom, the hallway was filled with soft footsteps, murmured relief, the smell of rain still lingering on coats and hair. Hawk fell into step beside them, the rest of the crows, forming a loose semicircle like a natural perimeter. "Kid did good," Hawk rumbled. Jane peeked over Anthony's shoulder, shy but proud. Hawk gave her a small salute, 2 fingers to his forehead, before stepping back. They exited through the courthouse doors. A cold breeze washed over them, the kind that wakes everything up after a long fight. The sky was clearing, patches of blue pushing through the clouds. Jane tucked her head under Anthony's chin again. "Dad, yeah, bug, can we go home now?" The question broke him a little in the best way. She wasn't asking if they were safe. She wasn't asking about Rita. She wasn't bracing for another blow. She just wanted to go home. "Yeah," he said, voice thick. "We can go home." They reached the bottom of the courthouse steps. Hawk stopped him with a hand on his shoulder. "You did right by her," Hawk said quietly. Anthony looked at his daughter, small, resilient, her arms tight around him. "Couldn't have done it alone," he replied. Hawk gave a small grunt that meant you didn't have to. Then, as Anthony walked Jane toward the trucks, he realized something. Winning wasn't the gavel. It wasn't the sentence. It wasn't even watching Rita taken away. Winning was this moment. Jane's breath steady against his collar. Her heartbeat calm. Her question simple. Winning was safety. He opened the truck door, helped Jane in, and buckled her gently. As he closed the door, he allowed himself one long breath, a breath held for months, finally released into the cool afternoon air. Justice had spoken, and now finally they could start healing. 6 months later, winter had loosened its grip. Spring glassed the sidewalks in sunlight, warm and gold, the kind that brought children back onto front lawns and made the world feel possible again. The Foster house sat quiet on its cul-de-sac windows, open just enough to let in the soft breeze that smelled faintly of cut grass and gasoline. Anthony was in the garage, not hunched, not hurried, not hiding. Focused. The kind of focus he hadn't touched since before grief rewired his life. A steady rhythm echoed inside the garage, metal against metal tools, clinking, the soft whir of an electric sander smoothing a curve he'd shaped by hand. The bike stood on a lift under the hanging bulb, its frame small but solid, like a promise being welded into reality. Sky blue. Not just any blue, Jane's blue, the shade she always used when she painted skies in her sketchbook. He'd mixed the custom paint himself, adjusting the tone until it looked exactly like the swath she'd brushed across the page the morning she decided to testify. The tank gleamed. "Sarah's girl," he whispered under his breath, as he traced the lettering with a cloth tiny hidden beneath Jane's name, barely visible unless someone knew where to look. A secret tribute. A gentle echo. Footsteps pattered behind him. "Dad?" Jane asked from the doorway, hair loose, cheeks flushed from running in the Sunday. He turned. She'd changed too. She stood straighter, laughed louder, slept without blinking into the hallway light. She still had quiet days, but they were soft, quiet, not the brittle kind. "Perfect timing," he said. "Want to see?" She nodded eagerly and ran forward, stopping beside the lift with reverence like she was approaching a monument. Anthony lowered the bike. The pneumatic hiss filled the garage. Jane held her breath. The bike touched the floor. It was beautiful. A smaller frame fitted precisely to her height. Reinforced training wheels sat beside it, removable for later. The paint shimmered like morning sky on water. Chrome glinted along the handlebars. Her name was written across the tank in looping white letters. "Can I try it?" she whispered. Anthony's throat tightened. "Yeah, Bug, let's do it." He wheeled the bike outside. Hawk sat on the porch steps next door, sipping coffee from a chipped mug, pretending he wasn't watching even as he clearly was. Two other crows leaned against their bikes by the curb, grinning like uncles at Christmas. Anthony fitted Jane's small helmet, adjusted the strap, tugged her gloves tight. "You remember what I told you?" he asked. "Balance first, power second. Look where you want to go." He smiled. "That's my girl." She climbed on. Feet steady. Hands sure. Heart loud enough he could practically hear it. "Ready?" he asked. Jane nodded. "Ride with me always." He rolled his own bike next to hers, the one he'd rebuilt quietly over months. Not the beast he'd once ridden across state lines, but a calmer, steadier machine rebuilt at the same speed he'd rebuilt himself. Jane placed her feet on the pegs. For a moment the world held still. Then she pushed off. The engine hummed. The wheels turned. The training wheels clicked lightly against the pavement as she gathered speed down the quiet suburban street. And she laughed. A bright, sharp sound that filled every space between houses and wires and sky. Anthony rode beside her, not leading, not pushing, just there. Her shadow and her anchor and her windbreak. Hawk whooped behind them. Someone honked. Neighbors peeked out their windows. And Jane, with her sky-blue machine and steady hands, rode like someone who had learned to put the past behind her, slowly at first, then faster. then with the kind of freedom only a child who survived something dark can feel when she enters the light again. She braked at the corner, turned back, cheeks flushed. "Dad," she shouted. "I can do it." Anthony slowed to a stop beside her. "I know." She beamed. Across town, reforms were rolling out. Anonymous reporting systems, mandatory investigations, 6-month footage retention, a dedicated child advocate in every district. Teachers attended new trainings. Administrators faced new oversight. School boards rewrote policies with the names of 17 children quietly etched between the lines. The world had shifted, not because a judge said guilty, not because Rita left in cuffs, but because parents stopped whispering, because a biker brotherhood stood behind them, because a little girl told the truth in front of strangers, and because a father refused to look away. Jane revved her engine lightly, eyes bright. "Can we go again?" Anthony grinned. "Bug, we're just getting started." She kicked off this time, steadier, this time faster, the bike catching sunlight like a moving piece of sky. Anthony followed at a comfortable distance, letting her lead, letting her take the road, letting her be free. Above them, the afternoon sky stretched clear and open blue, impossibly blue, the exact shade of the bike beneath her. And Jane rode straight into it. At its heart, this story reminds us that silence is not safety, especially when harm hides behind authority appearances or proper channels. Too many people, young and old, learn to swallow discomfort because they fear being dismissed, judged, or punished. But healing begins the moment someone decides that their voice, however small, however shaky, deserves space. As Americans often say, sunlight is the best disinfectant. When truth finally steps into the light, denial loses its power and justice begins to breathe. Anthony's journey shows that standing up to injustice doesn't require perfection or heroism. It requires persistence. It requires listening to our children, to our instincts, and to one another. And it requires the courage to confront systems that fail the vulnerable. For older adults who've lived long enough to see the best and worst of people, this story is a reminder that integrity is not something we outgrow. It's something we practice quietly, daily, sometimes painfully, until the scales finally balance. Jane's courage shows that dignity can survive cruelty, and that resilience is less about being strong and more about being believed. Even when the world feels heavy, a long road tests a good horse. Healing takes time, community, and the kind of love that shows up and stays. If this story moved you, I'd love to hear your reflections, share your thoughts, or similar experiences in the comments. Hit like to support these powerful narratives and subscribe so you won't miss our next gripping story filled with truth, courage, and heart. Wishing you peace, strength, and a little more light on whatever road you're walking tonight.